Kansas Republicans really want you to hate public schools. And in order to do that, they've resorted to a new rhetorical tactic. Instead of calling them public schools, they will now refer to them as government schools. Because, apparently everything related to government has to be bad, including education. Now, this, of course, is happening in Kansas, where conservatism has failed spectacularly after Governor Brownback basically massively cut taxes for giant corporations and very, very rich people, which in turn has blown a giant hole in the budget. Now, I've reported before that they're trying to patch this budget hole by cutting everywhere they can. And where are they cutting the most? Education, of course. After all, your kids don't need to learn facts. They don't need to actually learn things at all. No. What's more important is that a rich guy or a corporation gets a tax cut. So how did this start in Kansas? Well, the New York Times explains. According to State Senator Forrest Knox in an op-ed article last year, who was echoing concerns that the government was inserting himself into education. Quote, our local grade school is now the government school. Yes, government school. So, of course, since they're worried about, us trying to educate their kids, well, they want to pull a Frank Luntz and make everybody hate public schools. Now, I want to note that not all Republicans agree. Quote, the use of the term has set off alarms even among Republicans, who fear that it signals still less support, financially and otherwise, for the public schools in a state that has long felt pride over the quality of its education system. The recent adoption of a school finance plan that was acceptable to Mr. Brownback, the Legislature and Kansas Supreme Court, has not entirely assuaged those concerns. Well, yeah, because they've still pulled so much money out of education. But not only that, but calling it government schools is a ploy to kill public support so that Governor Brownback can actually take that money and have the voters approve of it and funnel it towards tax cuts for the rich. And of course, as well as putting in private schools. Now, private schools are for profit. Basically, this will achieve two different goals. Defund public schools and funnel money towards private schools, which are run for profit. Now, that of course will have a devastating effect on education in Kansas. These kids are going to be screwed. And what's going to happen to poor kids? Are they going to be able to go to school? Now, of course, they don't see this as a bad thing. And that's the thing. There was a conservative radio host named Bob Weeks, who was the host of something called Wichita Liberty TV. He said this about this whole thing. Quote, it is surprising to me that liberals and progressives object to the term government schools. They like government, don't they? These people want more taxation and government spending, don't they? Well, when we think about our public schools, we find that they have all the characteristics of government programs. Now, that is a good example of how they're framing this discussion. Well, when you stick the word government in front of things, well, right now, a lot of Americans are very wary of the government. And we, of course, have Ronald Reagan to thank for that. No, the reason that we don't call it a government school, by the way, is because it's a public institution. It's funded by and open to everyone. And it's more run by local government, not the federal government. But anyway, calling it a government school is essentially putting a bad connotation on it. Now for me, I'm actually tired of that bad connotation when it comes to the government. Government actually does good things. And not only that, but hey, conservatives, the military is also part of the government. So now why don't we call it the government armed forces or the government military? Maybe if we did that, the conservatives wouldn't want to overfund it the way that they always do. And I have a good example of that. Do you know that Congress just bought a $400 million ship for the Navy that they didn't want, nor did they need? They said, we don't want the ship. Well, too bad. we're gonna buy that shit for you anyway. But when it comes to education, well, that's just too damn expensive. No, putting the word government in front of the programs they like, you know what? That might be a good idea. I might be onto something. After all, two can play this game, bitch. Now back to the article. There's a linguistics professor at the University of California named George Lakoff. Now, he's been tracking the trend of changing the discussion by framing the debate. And he pointed out that the right has been very much a lot more successful than the left at framing issues, especially ones related to abortion, healthcare, unions, and the concept of government itself, among other issues with carefully contrived catchphrases like tax relief, pro-life, the Democrat Party, death panels, and Obamacare. Now, Lakoff says, besides coining phrases, the right has co-opted certain words, a practice that was demonstrated, he said, in President George W. Bush's second inaugural address, which used the words, quote, freedom, free, or liberty 49 times in 20 minutes. The right has taken over the words freedom and liberty, according to Dr. Lakoff. Now, the thing is, they don't own the words freedom or liberty. Nobody does, right? And to be honest, a lot of their policies are the opposite of those things. Like, for example, restricting abortion and birth control, or preventing gay people from getting married. Where's the freedom in that? Oh, it's freedom for you, as a straight white conservative, who's probably a Christian, to discriminate against people you feel are lesser. That's where the freedom comes in. But freedom for all Americans? No, we don't care about that. Absolutely not. Where's the freedom? Now, there's more about the messaging that Republicans have been so good at. For this, I go to Deborah Tannen. She's a professor of linguistics at Georgetown University. Now, she recalled the 1986 speech in which President Ronald Reagan framed the perception of government to great effect. Quote, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, he said. People tend to trace the demonization of government to Reagan, Dr. Tannen said. That's kind of iconic how he was using it. He set the government up as the enemy. Now, the government, your fellow Americans, that's apparently the enemy. Look, when it goes tyrannical, sure. When it takes away your rights, sure. But they don't consider the government the enemy at all when they're giving pork to districts that create jobs, or when they block gay rights, or when they give massive amounts of corporate welfare, or when they try to ban trans people in bathrooms. They love the government then. No. They just hate it when we try to educate their children with facts. But as Lakoff explains, conservatives in Kansas have extended the semantical positioning of government to education, conveying the message that public schools are a form of government imposition. Now, I also want to point out, right, that this is not new. Saying that something is government imposition, giving saying government is terrible, as we found out with Reagan, and even trying to involve education into this paradigm, into this lexicon, it's been going on for a while. And it actually, one of the biggest examples of that is the libertarian platform that was adopted in the 1980s. Now, it said that government schools lead to the indoctrination of children and interfere with the free choice of individuals. Now, how many times have you heard that? Even before this Kansas mess. You've heard, oh, liberals with their indoctrination centers, the public schools, they're trying to teach your kids facts that I hate. I hate facts. I hate facts. I hate logic and reason. Now, I don't want my kids exposed to those. Why? Because then they'll fight with me, because then they won't be like me, and therefore I'll feel like a bad parent, or something like that. Look, this has been going on for a long time. And now Kansas is pretty much officially adopting this at this point and using this. And of course, they're starting to use this. This means that it's probably going to spread to other states. But now finally, I want to go to a quote by John Locke, who's a professor of linguistics at the City University of New York. said that the use of the word government, schools in this context, is to, as I've pointed out, to create a negative connotation to all public schools. Dr. Locke says, quote, "It's austere, it has an oppressive ring to it. It sounds rigid, the opposite of open or friendly or charming or congenial. The people who use that term are hoping those words will come to mind." Now, what I think is that, look, this is how they win. By messing with the language. They don't have the policies. No, their policies are give rich people more money, reduce regulations, and, cut corporate taxes. Those are pretty simple policies, right? They don't have to fine-tune those policies. No, they've known this, they've had the same policies for decades. So they have all this free time, instead of coming up with policies to help the American people, to tweak their message. And that's all they do. And that's why they win. They win with the message. They don't win on the policies. Poll after poll, I pointed out before, that progressive priorities, things like raising the minimum wage, things like doing more infrastructure and putting people to work through government spending, is actually wildly popular compared to some of the policy priorities put forward by Republicans. And yet, at the same time, Republicans win because they frame the debate. And in order for progressives to win, we've got to prevent them from changing the narrative and controlling the conversation. And I know it's kind of new to us liberals, but messaging is just as important as the policies. You have to, look, you could have the most amazing policy, right? But if your opponent frames the conversation first to make your policy look like it's terrible or it's tyranny or it's crap, well, you're probably not going to win the messaging war. And therefore, you're probably not going to win the policy war either. Now, Republicans could and have had some of the worst policies. But the thing that they do is they call it the Freedom Act. Or, look, a good example is the Patriot Act, right? The Patriot Act is full of incredibly awful stuff that takes away your freedom and even allows the government to spy on you with warrantless wiretaps. No, that's terrible. But you do this rhetorical trick where you say, hey, this is freedom, you're a patriot, whatever, the Puppies and Kittens Act of 2016. It could literally be a policy where you're taking old people and shoving them off a cliff. But you call it the Puppies and Kittens Act, well, people are going to like it. Okay, messaging, right? Because I have to be honest, a lot of people out in the electorate, they don't have time to look at these in-depth policies. They don't have time, and a lot of people are sadly swayed with what you call it and how you frame it in the news, how you frame it in the media, how your politician talks about it and frames it. Messaging has a lot to do with the success of policies. So that's why I'm saying you've got to change the message, you've got to frame the discussion, or else someone else is going to do it for you. And if that happens, well, you might end up not liking the results.